Because cathedrals are perhaps the greatest symbol of long-term thinking in Western culture. And transformative thinking is what I want to discuss tonight. I want to talk about how we can become not just cathedral thinkers, but something even bigger than that, the idea of being a good ancestor. We know that it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. We're going to be entering the hellfire of Hertogenbosch Bosch's paintings in many ways. So there's a real question there of how those future generations are going to remember us for what we did or didn't do when we had the chance. And someone who really thought about this a lot was the immunologist Jonas Salk, who developed the first polio vaccine back in the 1950s. And he believed that the great question facing our society was this: are we being good ancestors? I call it the marshmallow brain, named after the famous marshmallow test, which was a psychology test from the 1960s, and a marshmallow was put in front of children, and if they could resist eating it for 15 minutes, they were rewarded with a second marshmallow. And this is the part of the brain which focuses on long-term thinking and planning and strategizing. And this capacity, this acorn brain capacity, is better developed in human beings than most other animals. So it's the acorn brain which has enabled us to build the Great Wall of China and voyage into space. So yes, there's a struggle going on between the marshmallow and the acorn. And the real question is, how do we switch this on? How do we make the acorn brain really work? But in the Netherlands, I don't think there's no Future Generations Commissioner, there's no Future Generations Ombudsman, there's no Ministry for the Future. Maybe that's something to think about if a government can actually be formed and they can get on with something like that. Very inspired by indigenous thought, long-term ideas of ecological stewardship. Like you can see in this quote here from Chief Oren Lyons from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or the Iroquois Confederacy. He says this, he says, "We're looking ahead as one of the first mandates given to us as chiefs to make sure that every decision we make relates to the welfare and well-being of the 7th generation to come. And the other half are given these beautiful ceremonial orange robes to wear." And this is mine. This is from the small town of Yahaba, population 30,000 in northern Japan. And the residents who are given these gowns to wear are told to imagine themselves as residents from the year 2060. So from 40 years from today. And it turns out that the residents from 2060 systematically advocate for far more radical and transformative plans for the towns and city, whether it's long-term investment in healthcare and education, or action on climate, or the threats of job losses from automation. You know, you've got a great carnival tradition, you know how to make amazing costumes, make your own gowns, you know, they don't have to look like this. And bring these new democratic forms into decision-making that focus our minds beyond now and on the future. And another great movement I like, inspired by the Native American 7th generation idea, is this legal movement in the United States. This is a public interest law firm called Our Children's Trust, which is suing the US government on behalf of the 21 young people there who are campaigning for the legal right to a safe climate and healthy atmosphere for both current and future generations. But a third way to think long term is to, in a way, go back to what Jonas Salk was talking about, the idea of the legacies that we're going to leave. And if we think about our legacies, we need to not just look forward, we need to look backwards. We need to think about the legacies we've inherited from the past. And here we are in a church. While most religions have come up with some version of the golden rule, do unto others as you have them do unto you. But that empathic principle is one we normally think of in today's world. Do unto someone maybe on the other side of the world, or a neighbor who's suffering as you want to be treated yourself. But why don't we create an intergenerational golden rule and treat future generations how we would have wanted to be treated ourselves? So what I would like to do now is to take you on a small, just a few minutes long, imaginative journey to connect with some future generations connected to you. Now, in order to do this, what I would like you to do now, just take a few minutes, I'd like you to close your eyes. So please close your eyes. And I'd like you to imagine the face of a young person in your life who you really care about. It could be a nephew or niece or your own child or grandchild, anybody. Just picture their face for a moment with your eyes closed. And now, still with your eyes closed, I'd like you to imagine them 30 years in the future. Again, picture their face. Think about the joys in their life and their struggles that they might be facing. Just hold that thought for a moment. And now, finally, I'd like you to imagine, still with your eyes closed, I want you to imagine it is their 90th birthday party. They're 90 years old, and they're surrounded by family and friends and loved ones and old work colleagues. Now, just go and have a look at the window. What kind of world do you see out that window? And now come back in, and you notice that this 90-year-old is about to stand up and give a birthday speech, because they're 90 years old, amazing, and suddenly they see a photograph of you, their departed dead ancestor, over on the table. And they decide instead to tell the gathered room about something that you did for their world, a positive legacy that you left them, something that you did to be a good ancestor. Now just think for a moment about what they said in their birthday speech about you, their departed dead ancestor. And now just open your eyes again and come back into the present moment. Now, for a lot of people, that kind of exercise can be quite difficult and confronting. Thinking about that imaginative exercise we just did, imagining 90 years old, I want you to talk about what did that exercise make you think and how did it make you feel? Okay, what did it make you think and how did it make you feel? So on the count of 3, I want you to fill this cathedral with your voices and blow off the roof with your conversation. So 1, 2, 3, go. And what I learned from that was that if I cared about her life, I needed to care about all life. That thinking about someone very close to me was a bridge to a more universal care for the unknown strangers of the future. From the movement called the Green Belt Movement, founded by Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1977, she founded this movement, which was it's a kind of an ecological movement in Kenya. And since it was founded, they've planted over 40 million trees. They've trained over 30,000 women in agroforestry skills. They're still working in more than 3,000 communities in sub-Saharan Africa. But this is a classic kind of acorn brain, project. It's all about planting the seeds that you may never see fully grown in your own lifetime, which is the idea of pursuing a transcendent goal. In other words, an objective which is bigger than yourself, but an objective like an ultimate goal for the whole of society. Because I think you've got all these different kinds of long-term thinking, but what do they all aim towards? We need like a star to guide them, a transcendent goal, or what the ancient Greeks called a telos, an ultimate goal. But what should the goal of our species be? I mean, that's a big question to ask in a big building. We need economies that do that too, that live within the boundaries of this one planet we know that sustains life. So how can we embody that as a kind of a goal for society? Well, I think in terms of economically, as an alternative to the constant GDP growth idea, there is one good model. There are lots of good models out there, but the one I've written about in my book, more than anything, is the model of, from Kate Raworth, the economist's book, Donor Economics, the model of the donor of social and planetary boundaries. You might be familiar with this. I'm familiar with this because Kate Raworth happens to be my wife. I admit that. But, you know, and there are other models out there, but the donut as a model is spreading very fast in many countries around the world. This is our global selfie. This is the data showing us on a global level how we're failing to meet the basic social foundations. We're overshooting the ecological ceiling. At 3 minutes before midnight, man appeared. 1/4 of a second before midnight, Christ arrived. At 1/40th of a second before midnight, the Industrial Revolution began. We are surrounded by people who think that what we have been doing for 1/40th of a second can go on indefinitely. They are considered normal, but they are stark, raving mad. I think that's pretty wise, and quite a good way of putting deep time to work and having a kind of humility. Who are we in just a couple of centuries to have wrought such destruction without ecological degradation, without technological degradation and risks as well? So that's deep time, but where does that leave us? I think that leaves us on a journey to extend our time horizons, to move away from the cycles of seconds and minutes and hours, the buy now button, stock markets, the 24/7 media, and recognize that we have a capacity, an incredible imaginative gift to think beyond the here and now, to think on the scale of decades, centuries and millennia, whether it's planting trees or seed banks or time capsules or flood defenses. We need to ask ourselves, where am I living my life? On what scale? Am I living on seconds and minutes or decades and centuries? And how can I maybe expand that? But ultimately, in a way, if we're even going to get this kind of thinking into our minds, I believe that we need new rituals, new habits, new ways of thinking and living which embody the idea of the good ancestor. And religions through history have been really good at inventing rituals to connect with longer cycles of time. And I want to just finish by showing you a little bit of a 1-minute video from a new ritual that I've been part of, but it's actually an ancient ritual which has involved me with some of my colleagues from the Long Now Foundation, some of those who are based in London. And what we did is we went and to a place about 20 miles south from where I live in Oxford, in the UK. It's called the White Horse of Uffington. It's a gigantic white horse which has been carved into the side of a white chalk mountain. It's 100 meters long. This horse is over 3,000 years old. It's from the Bronze Age. But every year, for centuries, local people have been going up the hill every year to re-chalk the horse. It means getting hammers, getting white stone and bashing it into the horse and taking out the weeds. And I'm actually in this video here. We are re-chalking the horse there. I went and redid it again with my daughter just a few weeks ago. And this is an annual ritual which I am now performing, and we can all, I think, ask ourselves, what kind of rituals can we invent to connect with a longer now? That White Horse of Uffington for me, when I'm sitting there for like 8 hours bashing bits of stone, it's only once a year at least, but you feel connected with something longer. Like when you come to a place like this, you can use your imagination to connect with generations past, but with generations future. I hope that there will be people bashing white chalk into the horse for hundreds of years to come, and maintaining the things that really matter to us culturally. And I believe that if we do that, if we create those rituals, if we develop those ways of becoming or practicing long-term thinking, those 6 ways, I believe then we might just become the good ancestors that future generations deserve. Thank you very much. I'm very, very sorry to say this, but you know, the Dutch invented capitalism, as you know, in the 17th century. You know, Amsterdam had the first stock exchange in the world, the Amsterdam Bourse. The limited liability company was invented in the Netherlands in the early 17th century. The first public share offering from the Dutch East India Company, 1602. A lot of the problems we have come, okay, maybe out of Amsterdam.
We have work to do. Okay, it's clear.
And, you know, we've inherited that, but the problem with sort of neoliberal forms of capitalism is that there's no long-term vision built into it. I think that actually, if you look around at the world that we're in, you can see little moments of hope, examples of circular economy, regenerative economics. This morning, I went to Minitopia on a bicycle, you know. That was trying to rethink what housing is, trying to live lighter, ultimately deeply sustainably. And if you put all of those things together, which are small, you know, Minitopia says it, right? But together they create a network of time rebels in the economic sphere in that case. And I think we're seeing these time rebels emerge in lots of different places. I love despair, and I love fear, and I love panic. When Greta Thunberg said, you know, our house is on fire, I want you to panic, I thought, yes. And the reason I thought that was because, you know, where I live, lots of my friends have been involved in the ecological movement for decades. And they always say to me, you know, we need hope, hope, hope. And yes, that's true, in a sense. If you want a social movement to succeed and continue for the long term, there needs to be hope. But I think particularly on the political level, we need to use fear, panic, you know, all those things can actually create action as well. Like anger too. You know, anger I think is a really useful emotion. I started writing this book, The Good Ancestor, I realized that really for me it was a journey of trying to find the language that we needed to talk about these issues. Because, you know, since 1987 there's been over 200 United Nations resolutions mentioning the term future generations. But what has changed? Not very much. We can ask ourselves these sort of an existential question every day. Either when you wake up, you can ask yourself when you wake up, or when you go to bed maybe is better. Ask yourself, what have I done today to be a good ancestor? And think of it on any time scale that you like. You know? Or maybe in the morning, wake up and think, what can I do today to be a good ancestor? And I think when you make those kinds of questions habits, this is when we start changing as people. But in terms of scale, I mean, in my own family, I recently conducted, actually some months ago, on my 50th birthday, I took my children and my partner. For my 50th birthday, we decided to have, I decided, in fact, to have a picnic in a tree that was nearly 900 years old. And you could climb into this ancient yew tree.
You had a picnic up in a tree?
Up in the tree. And we talked about deep time, the fact that this tree had seen the Black Death in the 14th century. This tree had seen the English Civil War in the 17th century, that it would be there long after we had gone.
Yeah. Last question. You asked the audience, do you see a dystopian future, or is it a very nice future? Can I ask you, are you hopeful? What do you see?
Am I hopeful?
Are you hopeful?
Well, in my mind, I kind of make a distinction between optimism and hope. And I don't know how it works in Dutch, but at least in English, you know, optimism tends to be a kind of a glass half full attitude. The idea that everything's going to be okay, even if the evidence isn't showing that. You just feel like everything will be okay.
We're going to make it.
Yeah, and I'm not an optimist, you know. I don't like that false sense of possibility. Pursuing something that you really care about, even if the chances are not very great. Look, if I look at the world and our public and political and economic institutions, of course I'm not hopeful. You know, in a great big sense. I don't think everything's going in the right direction. Yes, it's true, the ecological movement is the world's biggest social movement, and that is amazing. The biggest movement in history. And let us all embark on that great struggle to give those future generations, the future holders, the world that they deserve.
Well, I think there's no better way to end this. I see some time rebels here. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you.
So much, and good luck with all the next future.
Really wonderful.
It just sounds so moving as well, as you describe it, the way people respond to it. So it's really extraordinary.
Yeah, I have people crying. The emotions are really right here, and it's
Let's all
extraordinary.
pick up our pens and write the future.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you.